You open your kitchen cabinet this morning and you count them. 30 bottles, maybe 40. White plastic containers with bright labels. Vitamin D3, magnesium, probiotics, B-complex, turmeric, fish oil. Each one promises to fix a specific piece of your health, costing $30, $40, or $60 a container. If you add up the receipts, you are looking at hundreds of dollars a year sitting on that shelf, slowly turning into brittle tablets and oxidized oil. And deep down, before breakfast, you already suspect most of them are doing absolutely nothing for your body. Understand this. Let it sit in your mind for a moment. If the human body truly required 30 different factory-isolated compounds just to function without pain, how did anyone survive before the mid-20th century? How did our ancestors clear forests, raise families, and reach their 80s with steady hands, without a single amber plastic pill bottle to their name? Now, picture a different scene. A scrubbed white oak countertop in a farmhouse outside Mount Hope, Ohio. There is no medicine cabinet in the house, none. In its place sits a single glass jar covered with rough cheesecloth. Inside, a pale, straw-colored liquid is moving. If you lean in close, you can hear it. A soft, rhythmic fizzing, like clean rainwater falling on dry soil. There are 3 ingredients inside that jar, things you buy for under $4 total. Yet that quiet, bubbling crock delivers more bioavailable vitamins, organic acids, and active enzymes than every synthetic bottle on your shelf combined. The Amish have kept this jar alive for over 150 years. They do not call it medicine. They call it a habit. Let me tell you who I am. I am 63 years old. For 31 of those years, I walked into modern pharmacies and walked out with paper bags full of dietary supplements. I trusted the recommended values printed in tiny black ink. I believed the narrative that our food is empty and our bodies are fundamentally deficient without industrial intervention. I spent thousands chasing a feeling of vitality that always seemed to stay just 3 bottles away. That changed for me after my 60th birthday. I was visiting an old friend in Lancaster County, sitting at his long kitchen table. We were eating bread that his wife had pulled from the wood-fired oven that dawn. I noticed the complete absence of modern packaging. There were no supplements in the pantry, no pain relievers by the sink. My friend's grandfather, a man in his late 70s who could split white oak logs for 2 hours without breaking a sweat, noticed my eyes wondering. I asked him directly what he took for his stiff joints. He looked at me with a mild, puzzled expression. He said, "I drink the bug every morning since I was a boy." He walked me to a dark shelf and lifted the jar. It was cold to the touch. The liquid inside was cloudy, the color of weak tea, with pieces of ginger root resting at the bottom. He explained that his family fed this jar every morning with a spoonful of fresh ginger and a spoonful of plain white sugar. That was the entire mystery. No laboratory cultures, no expensive equipment, no freeze-dried probiotic packets. The living organisms that drive the transformation are already there, sleeping on the wrinkled brown skin of the root itself. You are not manufacturing life. You are simply building a clean house for it to live in. Now, we must establish an honest limit here. I am not telling you that a jar of fermented ginger water will set a broken bone, or that it replaces emergency surgery. It will not reverse 40 years of a heavy processed food diet in 24 hours. It is not an overnight miracle. Where it works, and where it has worked for generations, is in building the quiet, unbreakable baseline of everyday health. It works on the digestive tract, the blood, and the systemic inflammation that makes your joints ache when the weather turns cold. To understand why this simple crock succeeds where industrial supplements fail, we must look at bioavailability, the percentage of a nutrient your body can actually absorb. When you swallow a compressed synthetic multivitamin, your system sees an isolated chemical architecture. The body treats it as an intruder, expelling the vast majority through your urine. The USDA Dietary Supplement Database confirms this massive gulf between label claims and actual absorption. A living ferment is entirely different. When wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria consume the simple sugars in that jar, they perform a form of pre-digestion, unlocking natural compounds and manufacturing entirely new nutrients like B vitamins and vitamin K2, which guides calcium out of your arteries and into your bones. Stop and think about this. A commercial probiotic capsule drops 20 billion freeze-dried bacteria into a gut containing 100 trillion. It is a teaspoon of water poured into a swimming pool. A living ferment delivers the entire environment those organisms need to colonize and thrive. My friend's grandfather poured me a small glass. It was sharp, cold, slightly sweet, with a natural carbonation that prickled the tongue, followed by the deep, clean heat of ginger at the back of the throat. He told me that if I drank it every morning before breakfast, within 3 weeks, my kitchen cabinet would look like a graveyard of useless plastic bottles. I was skeptical, but I went to the store that evening, bought fresh ginger, and started my own jar. What happened to my digestion and the chronic stiffness in my hands over the next 90 days completely dismantled my trust in the supplement aisle. You do not need land, a homestead, or an old farmhouse to bring this back into your kitchen. You need a glass jar, a clean cloth, a thumb of ginger, 2 spoons of sugar, and 7 days of patience. But how you wake this jar up, the precise daily rhythm of feeding, the exact signs that show the wild colony has stabilized, and the secondary garlic ferment the elders used for deep winter illnesses, that is where the real practice begins. Let us look at exactly what you must do on the very first morning when you approach the jar. Let us clear the space on your counter and begin to bring this living ferment into your kitchen. You do not need sterilized laboratory conditions, but you do need intention. We are working with wild, invisible life forms that are already present in your room, on your hands, and on the skin of the root. If you treat them with careless haste, they will fail to thrive. If you follow the simple physics of the old ways, they will work for you for decades. First, select your vessel. You need a clean, quart-sized glass mason jar. Wash it thoroughly with hot water, but avoid using harsh chemical antibacterial soaps, because any residue left on the glass will kill the very microorganisms we want to welcome. Understand this clearly. Never let metal touch this liquid for any extended period. Do not use a metal lid, and do not use a stainless steel spoon to stir it. The modern alloys carry a subtle electrical charge that can disrupt the delicate colonial balance of wild yeasts. Use wood, bone, or a thick piece of food-grade glass to stir. Now, look at your water. This is where most beginners fail before they even start. If you draw water straight from a municipal tap, it contains chlorine or chloramines, designed specifically to destroy biological life. If you pour that over your ginger, your jar will remain dead, static, and clear. If you do not have access to a clean mountain spring or a deep well, take your tap water, pour it into an open jug, and let it sit uncovered on your table for a full 24 hours. The chlorine gas will slowly evaporate into the air, leaving behind a clean canvas for our ferment. Fill your quart jar 2/3 full with this rested water. Next, take a piece of fresh organic ginger root, about the size of your thumb. Look closely at the surface. The skin should be taut, slightly wrinkled, and pale tan with a faint sheen. Do not peel it. If you scrape that skin away with a knife, you are throwing the entire engine of this process into the compost bucket. That rough outer layer holds a powdery, invisible bloom of wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria collected from the soil where it grew. Wash it gently in cool, unchlorinated water, just to remove any loose dirt. Then grate or finely slice 2 tablespoons of the root, skin and all. Drop it into the water. Add 2 tablespoons of plain white cane sugar. I often see people try to substitute raw honey, maple syrup, or chemical sweeteners here because they think it is healthier. Do not do this. Stop and think about the mechanism at work. You are not adding sugar to sweeten a drink for your own tongue. You are providing immediate, easily accessible fuel for the wild yeasts. They require simple sucrose to build their initial numbers and produce the clean ethanol and carbon dioxide that protects the jar from spoilage. By the time you drink this ferment, the microscopic colony will have consumed nearly all the sugar, leaving behind a tart, medicinal tonic. Stir the mixture with your wooden spoon until the white crystals disappear into the pale, cloudy amber water. Cover the top of the jar with a clean piece of porous cheesecloth, a square of unbleached linen, or a simple paper coffee filter. Secure it tightly around the rim with a sturdy rubber band. This allows the jar to breathe, exchanging gases with the room, while keeping out dust and the tiny fruit flies that are naturally drawn to the smell of active fermentation. Place the jar on a quiet shelf or a kitchen counter where the temperature stays between 68 and 75 degrees. Keep it out of the harsh, direct rays of the afternoon sun, which can overheat the liquid and kill the initial bloom. This is day 1. Your only task now is to establish the daily rhythm of feeding. Every single morning at roughly the same hour, remove the cloth. Add 1 tablespoon of freshly grated ginger and 1 tablespoon of white sugar. Stir it thoroughly for 30 seconds, watching the wood lift the settled ginger pieces from the bottom of the glass. Cover it again. Repeat this exact process every evening before you go to bed, stirring it gently without adding extra food. By day 3, you will notice a distinct transformation. The liquid will lose its clear quality and turn a deep, milky, opaque straw color. If you lean in and listen, you will hear a faint rhythmic ticking sound. Tiny white bubbles will begin to form a perfect ring around the inside edge of the glass, riding up the sides like minimal ocean foam. When you remove the cloth, the smell will no longer be just the sharp spice of raw ginger. It will carry a rich, fruity, wine-like aroma with a distinct yeasty edge, similar to a young sourdough starter or a wild apple cider fermenting in a cellar. Watch for the typical mistakes during this first week. If you see a thin, white, wrinkled film forming across the top of the liquid, do not panic. That is calm yeast, a harmless surface growth that occurs when the room is slightly too warm or the liquid is not stirred frequently enough. Simply skim it off with a wooden spoon and continue your daily feeding. However, if you see green-black or furry patches appearing on the floating ginger pieces, that is true mold. It means your water was contaminated, your jar was unclean, or the temperature dropped too low for the wild bacteria to establish their acidic defense. If that happens, be honest with your mistake, pour the jar out, scald the glass with boiling water, and begin again. By day 7, the bug is fully mature. When you stir it, the liquid will hiss loudly, bubbling up with active carbonation. It is now a stable, self-regulating biological system. At this stage, you can begin the harvest. Every morning, pour off a half cup of the liquid through a non-metal strainer. This is your base tonic. You can drink it straight, or you can mix it into a traditional farm worker's switchel by combining it with a tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar and a teaspoon of local honey in a tall glass of cool water. To keep the jar alive on your counter, simply replace the half cup you removed with fresh, unchlorinated water and feed it a single tablespoon of ginger and sugar once every 2 days. Now, remember the faded pencil lines on page 41 of Eli's grandmother's binder from 1923. To create the secondary ferment, the long bug that the elders used when someone in the family fell ill. Take that half cup of harvested, active ginger bug and pour it into a separate, smaller glass jar. Take 1 large clove of fresh organic garlic. Do not use the pre-peeled imported garlic from the grocery store shelf. Use a local clove that still carries its natural papery skin. Peel it, lay it flat on your wooden board, and crush it firmly with the flat side of a wooden handle to release the juices. Drop the crushed garlic directly into the active ginger liquid. Cover this smaller jar with a clean cloth and let it sit on the counter for 4 additional days. Do not feed it sugar. The wild bacteria in the ginger bug will immediately begin to attack the sugars and sulfur compounds inside the garlic. By the second day, the sharp, biting scent of raw garlic will begin to change, mellowing into a pungent, deeply complex, savory aroma that smells old and medicinal. The liquid will take on a slightly thicker, almost syrupy consistency as the lactobacillus bacteria coat the garlic tissue. After 4 days, strain the liquid into a small, dark glass dropper bottle. The fermentation has broken down the raw allicin into highly bioavailable organosulfur compounds, creating an ancient living shield that your digestive tract can absorb instantly without stress. When a cold settles into the chest or the throat feels raw after a long day in the damp cold, the old protocol is simple. Take 1 teaspoon of this garlic ginger ferment in the morning and 1 teaspoon before sleep. It is sharp, warm, and carries the heavy weight of generations of survival behind it. Your grandmother's kitchen was once filled with these quiet, bubbling solutions. It takes only 7 days to bring them back. When you watch that jar bubbling quietly on your windowsill, it can look like a piece of old-world magic, but it is actually a beautiful, elegant demonstration of biological engineering. I am not a laboratory scientist with a wall of framed university degrees, but during my 31 years of testing these traditional methods, I realized one vital truth: if you do not understand the science of why a craft works, you will eventually abandon it the moment a small detail goes wrong. You need to understand the invisible architecture beneath the glass to truly respect what it does for your body. What is actually happening inside that cloudy amber liquid? We are witnessing a cooperative relationship between 2 distinct groups of microscopic life: wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria. To understand this, think of your kitchen jar not as a chemical soup, but as a small clearing in an old-growth forest. If you clear away the dead brush and leave a fertile open space, nature will fill it with specific life. In our case, the ginger root provides the wild seeds for that clearing. The wild yeasts arrive first. They consume the sucrose, the plain white sugar you added to the jar, and break it down into simpler sugars, producing small amounts of natural ethanol and carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct. This carbon dioxide is the exact reason you see those tiny rising bubbles and hear that soft hissing sound when you stir the liquid with your wooden spoon. Once the yeasts have prepared the ground, the lactic acid bacteria, primarily species from the lactobacillus family, take over the second shift. They consume the simpler sugars left behind by the yeast and convert them into lactic acid. Stop and think about this cooperation. The yeast builds the initial framework of the house, and the bacteria lay the shingles. One cannot thrive without the other. They rely on this micro-ecosystem to survive and dominate the jar. Understand this clearly. The most critical function of this microbial cooperation is protection through acidity. As the bacteria produce more lactic acid, the pH level of the liquid drops significantly, moving from neutral down to a highly acidic state between 3.5 and 4.5. This drop in pH is the invisible wall that protects your ferment from spoilage. Pathogenic bacteria. The dangerous variants that cause food poisoning, such as E. coli or Salmonella, fundamentally cannot survive or reproduce in a highly acidic environment. They are effectively locked out of the jar. This is why a traditional ferment can sit uncovered by a solid lid on a warm kitchen counter for weeks without rotting, while a bowl of regular cooked ginger soup would turn into a hazardous colony of black mold within 3 days. When we look at the secondary garlic ferment, the long bug, the biological science deepens further. Raw garlic contains a powerful defense compound called allicin, which gives the root its sharp, pungent bite and its potent natural antimicrobial properties. However, raw allicin is highly volatile and unstable. It degrades rapidly when exposed to the air or to the heat of cooking. When you drop that crushed garlic clove into the active, acidic environment of the mature ginger bug, the microbial enzymes go to work on it. They perform a slow, cold metabolic transformation, breaking down the fragile allicin into more stable, lipid-soluble sulfur compounds like diallyl sulfide and S-allylcysteine. These transformed compounds are far more resilient than raw garlic juice, and they carry a massive advantage. They are highly bioavailable. Your human digestive tract recognizes them as pre-digested food, allowing them to pass smoothly through the gut wall and into your bloodstream without causing the severe stomach irritation or raw acid reflux that often comes from swallowing raw garlic cloves on an empty stomach. But here is where we must step back and look honestly at the strict boundaries and limitations of this traditional craft. I will never look you in the eye and tell you that this jar is a universal miracle cure for every human affliction. It is not, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you folklore instead of truth. We must be entirely transparent about where this method succeeds and where it completely fails. First, let us look at the physical limitations of the ferment itself. The colony is entirely dependent on temperature stability and chemical purity. If your kitchen drops below 62 degrees during a severe winter freeze, the wild yeasts do not die, but they enter a state of deep dormancy. The bubbles will stop rising, the liquid will turn static and clear, and the protective acid barrier will cease to develop, leaving the jar vulnerable to surface molds. Conversely, if your counter exceeds 85 degrees in the height of summer, the bacteria will multiply too rapidly, consuming their entire food source in a matter of hours, and creating an overly sour, vinegar-like liquid that lacks the balanced enzymatic profile your body needs. Furthermore, this traditional method is completely defenseless against modern chemical agriculture. If you attempt to start this bug using a conventional ginger root that has been heavily sprayed with synthetic antifungal agents or irradiated at a shipping port to prevent sprouting, the ferment will never wake up. The skin is biologically dead. The same total failure occurs if you use municipal tap water treated with chloramines, which do not evaporate like regular chlorine. If the water contains chemicals designed to keep municipal pipes sterile, it will keep your jar sterile too. Now, consider the medical boundaries. Understand this with absolute clarity. A living ferment is a preventative strategy. It is a slow, methodical cultivation of the body's internal soil over months and years. If you are facing an acute, severe medical crisis, such as a deep kidney infection, acute pneumonia, or a sudden, severe bacterial blood infection, this jar will not save you. Modern pharmaceuticals, for all their industrial flaws, excel at emergency intervention. A raging, systemic infection requires the targeted, aggressive, and immediate force of isolated modern antibiotics. To rely on a teaspoon of fermented ginger water during an acute medical emergency is a dangerous misuse of traditional knowledge. The old practitioners were practical people. They used their crocks to keep the family's baseline strong through the winter. But they knew when a crisis required an apothecary's specific remedy or a surgeon's knife. Finally, understand that this ferment is not a magic shield that can cancel out a destructive lifestyle. If a person continues to live on highly processed foods, deprives their body of deep, restorative sleep, and remains under constant chronic stress, drinking a half cup of ginger bug every morning is like throwing a single bucket of water onto a burning house. It is simply one piece of an integrated, slow way of living. It is a habit, as the Amish say, not a quick fix to be swallowed while rushing out the door to a stressful job. It requires you to change your entire relationship with your body, moving away from constant crisis management and toward a lifestyle of quiet, daily stewardship. When we hold that jar of bubbling ginger water in our hands, we are not just holding a simple kitchen experiment. We are holding a thread that connects us to a vast, unbroken lineage of human survival. To fully understand why this knowledge matters today, we have to look back at how it survived the great clearing of traditional American life. This ferment did not originate in a vacuum, nor did it begin solely in the modern homesteading communities we see online. Its roots stretch back across the Atlantic, carried in the wooden chests of German, Swiss, and Alsatian settlers who arrived in the valleys of Pennsylvania and Ohio during the mid-1700s. These families brought with them a deep empirical understanding of the clay crock. They knew how to preserve the bounty of the earth using nothing but salt, water, and wild air. When ginger root became a standard commodity in early American shipping ports during the late colonial era, these master practitioners recognized its natural warming properties and immediately integrated it into their existing lactofermentation traditions. Understand this. This was not a hobby. It was an absolute economic and physical necessity. In the hot, sun-baked fields of 19th century America, dehydration and heat exhaustion were constant, lethal threats to a farm family. If you look through the archives of early American agriculture, you will find consistent, definitive proof of how this remedy was used to sustain human life under the most brutal conditions. In the 1840s volumes of The Cultivator, a prominent agricultural journal of that era, and within the early editions of the Old Farmer's Almanac, there are detailed accounts of what the old-timers called switchel, or haymaker's punch. The writers of those bulletins did not understand modern cellular hydration or potassium balance, but they observed something undeniable. When men drank plain well water during the heavy labor of the July hay harvest, they cramped, grew weak, and collapsed from the heat. But when they drank from stoneware jugs filled with a mixture of fermented ginger water, raw apple cider vinegar, and dark molasses, they could work for 12 hours in 96-degree heat without their muscles locking up. They would wrap those heavy clay jugs in wet burlap, bury them deep in the cool mud beneath the shade of an elderberry bush at the edge of the field, and take deep, long drafts between every wagon load of loose hay. It was the original electrolyte drink, built entirely from the kitchen pantry for pennies, long before modern corporate entities began bottling colored sugar water and selling it back to us in plastic containers. Farmer's Almanac. This historical usage is not mere romantic folklore. It is backed by rigorous, documented scientific history that most modern health writers completely overlook. In 1892, a British botanist named Harry Marshall Ward published a landmark study in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London. Ward spent years analyzing traditional ginger fermentation starters under the microscope. He was the very first scientist to document that these ferments are driven by a highly specific symbiotic culture of wild yeasts and beneficial bacteria. Modern microbiological assessments published in contemporary journals like the Journal of Food Science and Technology have verified his early work. When researchers isolate the microbes living inside a wild gingerbug, they consistently find robust colonies of lactobacillus and wild Saccharomyces strains. These organisms produce high concentrations of organic acids and active enzymes that prime the human digestive tract for nutrient absorption. The data is clear, recorded, and verifiable. Our ancestors did not need a microscope to know the jar was working. They simply looked at the health of their children and the endurance of their elders in the fields. Danielle Valdez, Medium may show one stop, and think about what this means for your own life today. We look back at these old journals and scientific bulletins not out of academic curiosity, but because they expose the great deception of the modern supplement industry. We have been trained to believe that health is something you must purchase in a sealed plastic bottle every 30 days. We have been told that our bodies are fragile, flawed machines that will break down unless we constantly feed them isolated, synthetic nutrients manufactured in a laboratory chemical plant. But the existence of that quiet jar on the farmhouse shelf proves that real vitality was once a free, distributed piece of community wisdom. It did not require a prescription, a specialized store, or a monthly financial sacrifice. It required nothing more than a kitchen counter, an observant eye, and the willingness to work alongside the natural laws of biology. I want you to look at your kitchen windowsill right now. If you are tired of the clutter of white plastic bottles, if you are tired of spending hundreds of dollars a year on tablets that pass through your system without leaving a trace of energy behind, Then I invite you to step back into this tradition this very weekend. Do not overcomplicate it. Do not wait until you have a larger house, a bigger yard, or the perfect set of tools. The wild yeasts waiting on the skin of that ginger root do not care about your bank account or your real estate. They only require a clean glass jar, a patch of shade on your counter, and 7 days of your attention. You are not buying a product. You are cultivating a relationship with a living system that can sustain your family for generations. When you slice that first thumb of ginger and stir the white sugar into the rested water, you are performing a quiet act of reclamation. You are stepping away from the corporate boardroom and back into the ancestral kitchen. For the first few days, it will look like nothing is happening. The jar will sit quiet, still, and dark. But by the fourth morning, when you lift that cloth, you will see those first tiny bubbles rising to the surface like a small waking breath. You will smell that sharp wine-like aroma filling your room. And on the 8th morning, when you pour your first small glass, you will taste the exact same tart, warming tonic that sustained the workers in the harvest fields of 1948. The shelf full of commercial bottles can wait. The living jar on your windowsill cannot. Start your jar tomorrow morning, feed it with steady hands, and take back what was always supposed to be yours.